Hello, my name is Michael Pucciarelli, and tonight I'll be talking about the white plexiglass table. And of course, I just want to give a quick introduction to who I am. I started professional photography around 2010, 2011. 2013, I got my associate degree from Montgomery College in digital photography. And in 2015, I joined Professional Photographers America. In 2017, I joined some of the local, affiliate clubs of the Eastern Shore. And in 2021, in the virtual ceremony, I received my craftsman degree. And then in 2022, I received my CPP, Certified Professional Photographer certification. So in the white plex table, we have a lot to cover. And I like all types of photography, especially still life photography. And I also like other, photography. So in tonight's agenda, we're of course be talking about the white plexiglass table. We're talking about how to use lights, one strobe with a modifier, two strobes with two, modifiers, and the same with three. And then I have illustrations on equipment, retail and homemade. And the simple homemade, you can just build with wood, and there's things you can buy in the store at good prices. And the camera settings, tonight I'll be talking about the R6. The Canon R6 is a great mirrorless camera. And then there's a demo using Bridge and Photoshop. And then I'm going to have another demo, a Photoshop screenshot presentation to explain it even further. And if you ever have any questions, I'll give you my email, which is here. And at the end of the presentation, I can give you other ways you can contact with me too. I'm going to quickly, show my portfolio. These are some of my latest light paintings, and that's a different webinar. Some of my black plexiglass images. And this is what I'll talk about in the Photoshop demo tonight. Talk about this in the Photoshop demo tonight. This is my latest light painting where I use, flash from the 8200 Pro and regular LED lights. This is another light painting. I just love to do small still life. I did food. I love black plexiglass products and black plexiglass. Love to bring out the product as well as the reflection. And this is part of an Italy trip. I visited two places, Italy and Tuscany. And this is near the Vatican. And this is near the Colosseum. This is near the Roman Forum. This is the Arc of the Titus. This is the smallest of the arcs. This is in Tuscany, the old theater. I like waterfalls. Burkittsglen Park. I've been there many times. It's a great place to photograph a lot of waterfalls. This is in Brookside Gardens, where I love reflection, and mornings are great mornings to spend in Brookside Gardens. And straight in my portfolio. So tonight we're going to be talking about the white plexiglass table. There are other webinars on the black plex table on YouTube channel I'll show later. A regular light, natural light, and light painting tables, but we're going to be focusing on this table. So there are lighting modifiers that can be used at any table. Includes a white plex table where you have mirrors, silver reflectors, bouncing light in a strong way, along with silver cards. Then there are white reflectors, white cards that can bounce in light in a soft way. Now, black cards are great for when there's too much light from a strobe or even a natural light, too much light coming from the window. You use a black card to control the light that's hitting the subject. Plastic fusion scrims are great for making the light softer. It's great for creating a cool backgrounds. In the maze you can do that, and I'll demonstrate that tonight in this demo. Then the colorful gels, where the gels could change the color of the background, also the color of the subject. And tonight I'll talk about how to use more than one gel color in a still life photograph. And then there's medium-sized white plexiglass sheets. It's great for putting in front of a strobe to make the light softer. Then a cinefill, it's a black aluminum foil where you could attach it with clothespins and spring clamps to the light. And then there's core blinds for controlling the natural daylight. And the bottom four objects, spring clamps, COG clamps, they hold stuff up and they're valuable in all sizes. Then there's duct tape clothespins, where duct tape is great for attaching like a gel to a strobe or fusion paper to a strobe. And then the clothespins, which does the same thing. And some of these you can buy at a lot of these you can buy at a hardware store, an art store. You can buy anything online. You can buy some of this at a drugstore. So, tonight's demo is about the white Plex table, where this is the same table I use today. I did 5 years ago. It's a nice table. It's light. It's not heavy. You can pick it up. You can move it easily. If you buy the photo frame, it could be heavier, and it is a lot more expensive. But prices of these could be coming down if you check the websites. So just when you purchase a white plexiglass table, know what you're buying. Read the description carefully. So there are many ways to use the white Plex table with one light, one flash, or a flash or continuous. A lot of times I use flash and natural light. And with natural light, there's a big thing tonight about the presentation. I'll use a white card or a silver card that bounce in light to make it look more natural. And two things are very important. You have angle of the camera and position of light, because if you dramatically change both, you dramatically get another type of photograph. In the next several slides, I'll talk about how to use one light with, a white card, a silver card. And in many ways, you can use one light. We have one light. This is one way to use one light. This is a great if you want to do food photography or a product. Or sometimes a product, you may have to angle the light, because the most important thing about the product is the label. But with food, it's like a plate of spaghetti or a plate of food. You want to have the light maybe with the snoot, or just maybe a softbox up here. And on the sides, you could have silver or white cards to bounce in light the way you like. Same thing over here, that you want to bounce the light in a soft way, use a white card. You want to bounce the light in a dramatic way, use a silver card. And you can put a light over here, like a strip box. And you can also bounce in details in a shadow, either with a silver or white card. The same thing over here. You can have a strobe aiming at the light. You can also have like a silver card just to put in a lot more detail in the shadow. And I'd recommend also that if this is like a shiny subject, that you put like a scrim in front of the light to make it softer. There's another way to use one light with a simple plexiglass table. where the light is shining right through the glass subject, and you have like a white scrim for a nice white background. And this is a great setup for like a clear glass because, of course, the light will shine right through. And this is the way to use two lights is you can have lights on either side. You can have a light over here and a light on top, or light on top and a light here. And a bouncing light without using a strobe, I'd recommend a white or silver card. And again, I'd recommend that if this were a shiny subject, I'd recommend that you put a plastic fusion scrim to soften the glare on the subject. So there's many ways you can use, two lights. Another way you could use two lights is you have a nice light for the backgrounds. Because if this were the only light, this would be a nice silhouette. But that's why we got to have a light here. You could also have a light, like a strip box over here. You can also bounce in light with a silver or white card. You can have light over here. You could bounce in light with the silver or white card. So with two lights in this setup, there's many ways you could position, the key lights, which is this thing here. This is the background light. And this is the way how I started at Montgomery College. 3 lights where we have a background underneath light, another background underneath light over here beside this wall, and then we have the key light. And there are many, there's a few things you can do with this setup is, since this light is over here, it'd be like have a floating characteristic, or you would power up the strobe. You have a nice subject on a floating backgrounds. But if you want to bring out the reflection, you move the light back, you would have it angled up, aiming at a 450 angle. And you could put a nice gel there. You would also power down the strobe. And you can have white or silver cards on the side the bouncing light. And you can position his light, on top or on the other corner. We have, gels where I use clothespins to attach the gel to the strobe. I also use armature clamps. A lot of times I, just place it around top of the softbox. So you don't even need, lights facing up. You just put the gel over the softbox. You can also use, spring clamps or C or G clamps to hold the light like this. You can use small spring clamps where it's the same as the clothespins. You can also use duct tape to attach it to a strobe. And how I use gels, where if I have more than one light, I could use a light color on one gel and a dark color on another light. So you get like good combination is a red and yellow, you get a nice orange, or dark blue and a yellow, you get a nice green. And a dark color and a light color, you just switch it, you can get some good contrasts. You have nice spring clamps where it flattens the curve out if you want to have more of a reflection. You can also use this very big G clamps or C clamps, but I like to use the spring clamps. The spring clamps could also hold up like foam board, it could hold up a fusion scrim in a frame, or a white plexiglass sheet. This is, one way to use a scrim fusion prim. You put it in front of the strobe, so you soften the glare on like a signage subject. And I always like to use like the grid on the strip box to make the light more flattering. This is how I use the scrim. You place it in front of the strobe. And there are other scrims I can do too, like the 6-foot scrims. You can just lean it against the table. I'll show that later. And that's either like a white foam board or like a big silver guard to bounce in light. This is just a foam board, just to bounce in light in a soft way. So the light would be here. So before we move on, so when you start with the light, before adding another light, add a silver or white card and try to do that in place of adding a second light. I know it may be hard. You may have to add a light. Fine, another light. But to make it look more natural, try to use a silver card. And then after 2 lights, do the same thing. Add a silver or white card. Your goal is to make the photo look really natural. So I'm going to check the chat. Let's see. No questions in the chat. Okay. Now, I'm going to be talking about the Canon R6. Great mirrorless camera. And it's a bit of an upgrade from what I used to use, the Canon 7D. And I was shooting RAW. And I either use manual for still life, because I use flash a lot, or I use bulb mode for light painting. A lot of times I start with aperture of 8 or 16. And the ISO is always 100 when I use a tripod. I'll talk about all these other settings later. You know, the R6 I'll talk about later. I could use 2 cards at the same time. You have Wi-Fi. This is a new mode, AF Intelligent, where if you're doing portraits, it recognizes the face, it recognizes the eyes. Drive mode for, regular still life or light painting. I like to start with a single shooting mode. Sometimes I can use the 2-second exposure. I've used all these modes, they all work well, but for still life, I just like to use a single shooting mode. I'll talk about bracketing later and all the settings. I always like to use a standard picture style mode. And it's a sharpness, I feel. And I never use a monochrome. I know some people do. And for black and white, I do everything in Photoshop, or I could do it in Camera Raw, but I prefer Photoshop with the actions. Other modes are good, like portrait, landscape. They work well in their environments, but for me, the standard picture I like the best. The focus mode, I prefer to zone autofocus, where you concentrate on several parts of the photograph. And I tried the vertical zone and a horizontal zone. They work well. They work. I prefer that. I mean, about the, it's a big upgrade, this camera. It's 1053, point focus, where camera has to reset, but I've used all these modes. They all work well. And I've used, I had no problem with the 1053, 1053 point focus. You know, we're dealing with mirrorless, which is a big upgrade from what I was used to using. But I'd still prefer using the zone autofocus, either manual, vertical, or horizontal. I always like to use the first three. Then you got single point focus. You can just move the cursor where you want to apply the focus. Then the spot autofocus is where it's for macro photography. And you just basically move the cursor where you want to apply the focus. And it's like, you know, it's more advanced than the single point of focus. Some people consider this, you know, single point of focus on steroids for this mode. And then there's tracking, where it's great for portraits. In this mode, you can enable the face and eye detection on the subject. White balance, I either use a daylight option or I just set the Kelvin to 5500 or to 58. Been using the Kelvin, been setting the Kelvin a lot because I like that better, but these settings are good. The daylight, the shade, cloudy. I never use AWS for my still life photography, even with this camera. But I know that people are happy with the AW, like for video or this camera, but I still prefer the daylight or set the Kelvin. And then there's custom white balance, where, you know, you just set the white balance by taking a picture of a gray card. With the high-speed noise ISO reduction, for properly exposed image, I disable this image. I would disable the setting. You can use low. With technology today, you should never use standard. Maybe you could use a very high ISO, but you almost pretty much don't need to use that. So I would try to avoid the standard and just either disable or use low. Now, what I would just, with a properly exposed image, I would disable this setting. A long exposure noise reduction. For product exposed image, I would disable it, but you can have one for auto, or I could just use auto. But enable, it's that algorithms are always happening. So it may take the camera as your setback, but I would just rather either use auto or disable for the long exposure noise reduction. Color space. It's great for posting on the web, but there are many ways you could use the sRGB photo color space in your JPEG. If you use an Adobe Photoshop, you want to make sure you don't check off that sRGB feature. But if you use it on the web, you want to make sure you do check it off. I always start from Adobe RGB, which is over 57 billion colors. But then when you convert it for the web, you use sRGB, then you're only stuck with 16.7 million colors. Now, some people start with ProPhoto RGB, but that's over 281 trillion colors. But the human eye can only, recognize 2 or 3 million colors, and ProPhoto RGB, a lot of colors can't be recognized by the human eye. Then when you print, then you're only stuck with 16,000 colors. It's great for printing, and it's the final conversion when you print from computer to the printer. The cropping, aspect ratio. Since we're using full frame, I would just use a setting. You have complete pixel control. You have more pixel power than the 1.6 is for the sensor C. Bad thing about this is you don't use all the pixels. And now the others are good for other needs, like 1 to 1, 4 to 3, 16 to 9, but I always like to have it at full, because you get complete pixel power. Auto exposure bracketing. I know on the R6 you can have more than, 2 other exposures. You could have 6, you could have 7. Still like to use 3. You have a regular underexposed, overexposed, a stop apart. And I always use a stop because if 2 stops, it's for the underexposed or overexposed, you have a hard time working with the pixels. That's why I like to use the 1-stop exposure. The continuous AF can be used 2 ways. If you want the thing to not focus when you turn on the camera, you want to enable it. You should not want that. So you disable it so it only focuses when you pick the shutter button. It's a lot better to disable the continuous AF because you're in control of the focus, not the camera always adjusting the focus. And then there's AF method where you could have eye detection and face detection on like a portrait. That's good to use. For the increments, I like to use 1/3 chops for everything. I know you could change the 1/2, and I always use the 3 bracketed chops for the HDR. And again, with the R6, you could have more than 3 exposures for the image. Now, this camera, like the R5 and R3, you could write to 2 cards at the same time. You could switch from card 1 to card 2 when the first card is full. And some people I know record the both cards for backups. I will do this eventually, soon. And this camera will work with 2 types of cards: the secure digital extended capacity and also the secure digital high capacity. Where the extended one, it's great speed and performance. It's a lot faster than the regular secure one. And the SDXC has 2 terabytes of data storage. The lower one only has 32 gigabytes. Big difference in storage space. It's an older card. And the speed, the first one, the SDXC, the secure extended one, it's 10 times faster than the regular secure card. But they're both good, but I prefer the first one, the SDXC. These are some of the strobes I use. I use 2 strip boxes and I use 2 regular strobes. And the 2 regular strobes are 2 times brighter than the strip boxes. But the strip boxes have a different purpose. They have a narrow light. These are my continuous lights where I have 2 D5s of Westcott. I have 2 7-socket heads. And there's ways you could control the lights for the effect that you like. And then I have 6 small floodlights, or 3. I used to have 6, but I decided to trade in 3. I only have 3, I only need 3. So there's lots you could do with continuous light. I use many stands. I have 2 big boom stands, which come with these bags. I have other boom stands, but I had to buy these bags separately. And I have all my stands in the holes of the blocks. And then I have ground stands. I have 3-foot stands. I have 5-foot stands. I recommend the stands of either Manfrotto or Impacts. I have a silver reflector, a white reflector, and it's great for bouncing in light. They're great for creating a scrim to put in front of a strobe when the light is too harsh, like on a shiny subject. And they're great for adding in light in, the silver car will add in light in a dramatic way. And the white screen reflector will add light in a soft way. Snoots are great for softening the light in a narrow way. It's great for feed photography. It's also great for product photography. You want to make sure that make sure you use the grid for flattering lighting. It also comes with gels, but I never used a gel. There's circular gels, but some people do use them to put in color in the flash for certain effects. You want to make sure you aim the light with the snoot at a 45-degree angle for proper lighting and balance. These are my aluminum bowls. These are tough, they're sturdy, they last for life. And it's great for when you fire a flash that the aluminum will bounce in light to make the subject more flattering. These are great for portraits. These are crates where it's great for holding up a light. It's also great for storing stuff. And the same thing with the bucket. Sometimes, managers throw these away. You find them on the side of the road. And I did find one on my way coming home from Brookside Gardens, and I grabbed it and I cleaned it. It's a nice crate. These are my still life tables they use for light painting. Sometimes people give away wood. I took the wood and I got some L brackets and I used wood screws. These are very sturdy tables. I think these are great for, doing light painting. Small ones could hold jewelry. Also, this used to be a bookcase, one of them, and it's now a nice small still life table. It's my homemade rack. Now it has many holes, and these poles expand for like a background. I used to store all my stands in here, but now I store all my foam boards. These are my black and white cubes. You can buy these at Target for about $25, and you could put like a piece of wood as a table or a white plexiglass. Since we're talking about the white plexiglass, you could also put a black plexiglass. These blocks are great, like I showed, to hold up the stands, but you could stand it up. You could put a foam board on the edge and it'll hold the foam board in place. These are stools because the arms are falling apart, and I felt like there's still value to these. So I got a power saw and I cut off the arms. It's now a nice stool. You could have someone sit on it, or you could create this into a table. You also put a light. This came with my brand new dishwasher. I saw value in this and I did not want to throw it away. And I screwed on this piece of wood. You could put a light. You don't have to worry about the light touching the floor. You could also angle the light, or you could, there's many ways to use this as holding a light on the floor. You could also angle light that can go up. These are my big black hard Bs. This is great for making a room dark or a nice black background. And it's great for blocking out too much light if it hits the subject. Now they use these in light painting, but you also use these to block out too much light. These are my expansion poles, where it just goes to the floor, it attaches to the ceiling. These are, C or G clamps that hold up the scrim. These poles are great for so many ways of holding stuff. These are my regular inch poles. Another table called the Blackpix table uses these, but these should be used to hold up a backgrounds. And these can expand. You can hold up a very big backgrounds. These are the lenses I use for most of my still life. I use basically the prime, which is the 24 mm, 85, 35, 50. For regular still life light painting, I like to use a 35, but for product, I like to use the 50 or the 85. And I've used the 24, but a lot of times I just use the 35. My two non-prime lenses I use for outdoors, like the 7200. And this is my mirrorless R6. I'm not using this for everything. I may still use my 7D because I feel like switching the lenses, but I may switch the lens on this camera more than the other camera. But I'm very thankful for the Canon converter. And this works great on any RF lens. And below, I have a YouTube video on how to use the R6, how I use it. It's in one of my links on my YouTube channel, Still Life Photography Michael Pucciarelli. Image stabilization with the R6, it's a whole nother level, like 6 levels higher than the regular Canon 7D. Not going to cause a vibe reduction, but if you use a tripod, turn it off. If you don't use a tripod, turn it on. Because in the past, you may have color shift problems with mirrorless. This is probably less of a problem, but I would still, you put it on a tripod, you turn it off. And then for the autofocus and manual focus, outdoor, they use autofocus. And then for light painting, I start with autofocus and I switch to manual focus. And I use autofocus for still life. The camera case I use, I buy on Micro Center, and they're very sturdy, very tough. They don't take up a lot of space. They protect my equipment well. These are my tripods or stands. I have an architect tripod. I have a regular tripod for landscape. We're extending the lens really wide. Now I always use my stand for still life photography, at least in the studio. And we use a cable release or remote release to avoid camera shake. Here my R6 wire release, my 7D remote or wire cable wire release. I know that technology today, you can use your phone with the Wi-Fi, but I will experiment that. But I just like using my, wired cable release for either camera. These are my connecting cables where this will go on the computer. This is a booster cable. And then for the R6, I would use it over here. I connect this to the camera. So I always do Lightroom tethered capture when I do still life photography. Then this would be the 7D. I would connect this, and this would connect to the computer. And this booster cable will protect and make the signal stronger. And, this is my remote shutter where operated by 2 AAA batteries, and this will fit on any Canon hot shoe. It's designed for a Canon. And it has, 30 channels to work with. It has a flexible timer, which displays 2 digits for the hour, minute, and second. It's a lot more flexible than the wired release. You can move around. You have over 80 meters of remote distance. My Skyport transmitter, where it uses 2 AA batteries, but it has 16 channels. But the 430 I've been using a while, but this could take the place of this, but then you're only stuck with 4 channels and 3 different groupings, but it has 4 AA batteries, but this has a different purpose than this, but they could sort of do the same thing with serving as a transmitter. I use Novus. Most of the times I just use 1. But if there's a scratch, I do 2 and then 1. I rarely ever use 3. If I do, I use 3. I get a cloth, I wipe, and then I do 2, and then I shine with 1. And these are my blowers, my lens blowers, or my turkey tweezers. It just blows dust off the table. You'll have this problem a lot in the black plexi table, but not as much as the white plexi. But sometimes it's good just to blow the table just to get the dust off. I recommend that, you just get a lint cloth and you just use Novus 1. These are my mirrors. These are mirror plates, armature clamps. You can buy these mirrors at CVS at the arm. My duct tape, armature wire. My COG clamps, the hold stuff. You can buy them online or at any hardware store. These are my spring clamps. These big ones, I have 4 of them. I have many of these. These are very tough. They hold the whatever you need in place very solid. These are the gels. I was walking in Plaza Arts. They don't sell this anymore. They don't make it anymore, but I think that could probably change. You may have to buy it online, but I got all my gels when they had it at Plaza Arts. Then these are my silver and gold cards. You can buy this at any art store like Michael's or online. My Cinefil, my Fusion draft paper. These are my scrims, my frames. You can buy at any art store. I bought this at Target, and I bought the Fusion paper at Plaza Arts. These are stretcher art frames at Plaza Arts, and you can buy Fusion paper from BH. These are my plexiglass sheets: the white, the clear, the black. If you want a small white plexiglass table, use this. These are my 2 6-foot scrims where all you have to do is rest it on this tray, rest on a table. You don't need a stand. You could put 2 strobes. You could put 2 of this for a double scrim effect. And all it is wood from Home Depot with the L brackets with wood screws. And they're easy to move and they're very convenient. These are my big white cards for creating like a white background. You could use a small one for food or just a bouncing light with the 1 light like I showed before. There's big black cards or black cards where you want to block some light or you want to create a nice background. Depending on when you have the light, you can have a nice gray background or a different color background like the white card. Now I'm going to go to Adobe Bridge. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about this file, file. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Camera Raw. I'm going to set the defaults. You can also load settings. You can create a preset. But I'm just going to reset the default. I'm going to right click, open in Camera Raw. So I'm not going to load a preset. I'm not going to create a preset. I'm just going to reset to default. I'm going to do right click. I'm going to go open in Camera Raw. I'm just going to say reset to default. Open Camera Raw. I'm going to click the three dots. I'm not going to save settings. I'm not going to load settings. I'm just going to do reset to default. So now I'm going to open this camera. I'm going to open up the one with the gray card. I'm going to get my white balance dropper, white balance tool. I'm going to try to set the white balance. And just make sure that the colors are balanced. I'm looking at the image. Maybe you contrast a little. I think the highlights are too powerful. Texture, I'm only going to do here. I'm going to do 2. I'm going to do 2. Not going to touch the curve. Detail, I used to go to 140, noise reduction 50, but I'm going to do this at the end in Photoshop. Color mixer, I know I can work with the hue, saturation, luminance, but I'm not going to touch this. Color grading, where this affects this and this and this. So when you do global, you're affecting the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows at the same time, or you can work with only the midtones by clicking on these circles. But you want to affect all of them, you do global. I'm going to check off remove chromatic aberration, use profile corrections, because you're going to be using the lens profile. When I check off remove chromatic aberration, you correct any color problems on the edges. And then geometry, I'm going to click A. Just click the A. This takes care of any distortion problems automatically. This is the easiest to use. Vignetting. I like to make this photograph more interesting. This is too much. So don't worry about the number. Look at the photograph. I'm going to click done. So I'm going to click on this photo and click on this photo. I want to tell sync settings. I'm going to open up a Camera Raw. So what I'm going to do is, I think with the contrast, I think I'm going to just we go 15. Let's see, 210. I'm going to do plus 10. I'm going to do the corrector to improve the texture just by 1 or 2, clarity just by 1 or 2. Put down 3. I'm not going to touch the detail. I'm going to do this at the end. Sometimes I can, put an S and make it more contrasting. I'm not going to touch, the hue, saturation, luminance. Color grading. I could work with the shadows individually, the highlights, the midtones. I work with them all at once. The optics. I'm going to check off remove chromatic aberration for color problems in the edges. I'm going to use profile corrections. And it shows you the lens. I'm using the 85 prime lens. There's no correction problem found. And then what I want to do is I want to put a vignette. I want to put a vignette to make the subject seem more important. I want to sync the settings because what I'm going to do, these are all the adjustments I made. Both files have the same settings. And now what I'm going to do, whoops, I'm going to go here. I'm going to open with Adobe Photoshop. I'm going to open Adobe Photoshop. I'm going to close out a bridge. I'm going to do a new screen share. I'm going to go to Photoshop. Where in both photographs, I'm going to make my screen smaller. I'm just going to use a navigator here. Then, window out of the way. Go to my actions. I'm going to do, I use actions a lot for everything. I use actions more than regular menu commands. And I use MFP because my name is Michael Francis Pucciarelli, so use my 3 initials. And I use, I have folders of actions, and all I do is, click the action and click play. I'm going to save in my computer. Give a unique name. I'm going to save in my computer. Now, there's many actions I can use. I'm going to try to talk a lot about them tonight. So when I did this, is when I ran this action, I did auto tone, auto contrast, and auto color, one right after the other. So I would save my work frequently. Another way I could do it is I could just go to my adjustments. I'm just going to, adjustments. I want to disable a layer because I want to show other things or actions. And then when I did this action, I call this action dodge and burn. I make an adjustment. I call the action white signature and black signature. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delete one of the layers. If you Control I to invert. Get my brush. I'm using a very soft brush. In the brush settings, I'm going to be using, 0% for hardness. So I want to use a very soft brush. And I want to make sure the opacity is 100. And a lot of times I like to use between 50, flow is 15% and 20. I like to use just 15%. Because if you change the flow to a lower percent, you get a different look and feel. I do Control Alt invert it. Because I'm painting white on a black layer mask. So I'm just painting in improvements on white on a black layer mask. The opacity 100, normal brush mode, and the flow is 15%. I click on the auto to bring out the contrast automatically. So now what I want to do is, in terms of cloning, I can get the mixer brush. I want to make sure I use the mixer brush, clean brush. Sometimes I use a mixer brush a lot. Sometimes I could use the clone tool. Sometimes I can just, use content aware. Sometimes I can even do this is frequency separation. Gonna find them my actions. Here we go. I like to use a clone on, high frequency layer. And I just like to use, like the Gaussian blur. Hi, you are late, but I am doing a recording, so you'll see the recording. Yeah, I did start at 7, so there is a recording. I'll display the recording when it's sometime this week or next week. Right now, I'm just going through the Photoshop demo. And I'm talking about, frequency separation, the low frequency, where I could use Gaussian blur, any blurs to make corrections. And how I use actions is when this is a group of actions, it calls one action right after the other. So when I do this group, I do dust and scratches first. And then I do the speckle. And then when I run this action, I do the high pass. Then sometimes I just go to edit, fade, whatever, and I change the blend mode to luminosity or soft light. I'm going to put on a black frame. Actually, before that, I need some cropping. Where when I ran this action, it calls this action. This action runs steps, calls a black color action. And then I come over here, this action calls this action. If it's a landscape, it does a big width. If not, big height. Here's a big width. And big width, big height. So when I do image, the action does all this. It gives me the settings. The longest side is only 400, which is the height. I'm going to do some background actions. I'll run a different one where first action is the speckle. Second action is dust and scratches. I have it set to 3. Then the unsharp mask. You set this at 200. Then it would be fade. It would be the last filter I use. I could change the blend mode to luminosity, blend mode to soft light. I'm going to put in a block frame. Where do the same thing. I run this. This action is called. It first calls this action. This action runs the steps. It calls this action. I'm using the black color of the frame. And then I'm calling this action a condition. So in this condition, if it's landscape, I call the width. If not, I call the big height. And these actions up here are the big width and the big height. That's how I use actions. I use them in groups. Like I said, I use a lot more actions in menu items because it's quicker. I have this export action where I usually have it at 100. Now, do you want to convert the sRGB? There's all my settings. Now I'll click save. And then over here, I'm going to run another action, same action. Photoshop will remember all your settings that you're previously done in the settings. So when I do an export, quality 100, sometimes I have to change it from 60 to 100, but when I do it to the web, I make sure I have this checked. When I copy and paste in Photoshop, I don't want to have this checked. And that's when I use the image processor and bridge. The new screen share. So this next part of the presentation is, the screenshots of how I use Adobe Camera Raw in Photoshop. And I'm going to first start with Adobe Camera Raw. This is the basic section, and I find a neutral with the white bounce dropper. Then neutralize the color by clicking on a gray. And sometimes I decrease the highlights and shadows with the same number, but in opposite directions. Sometimes in HDR photography, I negative out the highlights, I plus out the shadows. And then a lot of times for the texture and clarity, I usually do between +1 and +3. Now for black and white photography, I just do everything in Photoshop. Now for light painting, I don't touch the highlights, I don't touch the shadows. I just do the white balance, and then I just set the chromatic and profile in another slide. I'll show that later. Sometimes if there's data, I like to make an S-curve, and I make an S-curve. I never touch these sliders. Sharpening, I like to now sharpen in Photoshop in the end. I used to do 140, noise reduction 50, but I found that it's better just to wait at the ends. But if you ever want to see your photo in a bigger way, you can go to 200 and you see it in more detail, but then make sure you click it fit and view to get it the regular screen size. Optics, where in light painting, I would make sure that I would check this and check use profile corrections. When you check off remove chromatic aberration, you correct any color problems at the edges. When you use profile corrections using the the profile that you're using. In this case, I use 100-400, but wherever lens you use will be in this lens profile. For the geometry, I just like to use the A. It automatically corrects any common crookedness or distortion problems. If you have to rotate it, I just do it in Photoshop, but a lot of times I just click the A and it does what I need. Now this is where, if you want to put it vignetting, you want to move it slightly. If you have an impact in a photograph, I don't touch the grain. Now we're going to talk about how you use Adobe Photoshop screenshots. This is HR Auto, where if this were 3 or more files, I would run this action. I would do auto align layers and auto blend layers. Then I would do an image correct, auto image, where I do the auto levels with auto contrast. And then this levels is auto levels for, you want to neutralize the color, but then you want to do an auto black and white. So this happens auto tone, auto contrast, and auto color, one right after the other. So sometimes in the beginning, I run this and make a duplicate layer. Then I run this action. When I run this action happens. And I have actions for save in Photoshop. Right, it saves, and the next time you save it, Photoshop will remember the last place where you saved. Sometimes you use one action or in groups. My dodge and burn, I burn with the luminosity blend node, I dodge with the screen blend node, and that's the first part of the action. In the second part, I just make a level adjustment. I click on the auto button, and the last part of the action, there's a black type of my signature and a white, and delete one of the types I don't need. So when I run this action, first part is the burn and dodge, the second part is adjustment, and the third part is the signature, both black and white. When I run actions, I play this action. This happens, I set it at 3. And then this action, there's no prompt for the speckle. And then this happens, high pass. And this action is here. And so when I run this action, this happens and this happened. This is the last part of the action. Now do a frame. I call this action. And then I call this action. And then I call the black, which is here. And I come over here. I run this action. I run the condition. And these actions are defined elsewhere. So many actions are happening when I call this. This is a group of actions for the frame. The image size. See, after I run this action, my settings would be something like this, is where the longest side is 4,000, in this case, the width. You have resolution of 300 pixels per inch. Now the unsharp, I usually have it at 200. I just like to use 1.0 for every pixel. Maybe I could use 1.5, but I feel like 1.0 is better because, it's better, it's more powerful, more effective. And the threshold, between 6 and 7 levels is good for contrast. I feel like that maybe 1.5 and 2 is just too much, even with the merged image. Then my background options, where I call it a speckle, doesn't scratches. And the unsharp mask fade, where I have to run this action, it'll have the blend mode to luminosity. It's great for contrast. Another set of group of background actions called the speckle. I call the dozen scratches. The last one is unsharp mask. My JPEG settings, where the quality is 100, the action is going to ask where I want to export it. So next time when I run this, I'll go to where I want it to go without me navigating. So it's easy for the web, I want to convert to sRGB. It's very similar to the quick export, and the settings can be, adjusted. If you create a folder for the JPEG, when you run the action again, like I said, Photoshop remember the location every time we run the action in this workshop setting or adjustment. Then there's action with edit, paste in place. Very good for light painting, where you have a JPEG, you make a copy, Control-Command-C, then you want to paste, you run this action, you paste into place, and you set the current blend mode to lighten. And that's how I use light painting. And this frequency separation, where you have a high pass filter prompt, and the blend mode is, linear light. Then you have a regular blend mode. This is the high pass, filter. My black and white actions, where I like to work with the, channel mixer layer. Where you just swap, you zero out the red, zero out the blues, red groove gleam. Sometimes I could sometimes you could chuck off the monochrome, sometimes I don't. So depends on what I want to see. When I do portraits, I usually use one of these, and then I end with dark 7 and dark 8. And then I just make quick levels adjustment, and then a curve adjustment. Sometimes I can use a gradient map, and I change the blend mode to color. And the same thing with, the threshold. Change the blend mode to color, and you have a cool black and white. Sometimes you can just decrease the vibrance. Sometimes you can just decrease the hue and saturation for a black and white, and you use the lightness for contrast. And a lot of times I like to use the channel mixer layer, zeroing out the reds, zeroing out the greens, zeroing out the blues. So my Photoshop workflow, I have my layers, my brushes, I have my tabs, I have my actions, layers, channels, paths, adjustments, properties, info. These are my photography groups in Facebook. My Facebook group is growing every day. My other groups are growing. Some of these are run by myself, some of them are run with other people. And these are my meetup clubs. My Facegram, my Facebook, my Instagram. There's many ways to get in contact with me. LinkedIn, got my Twitter, got my fine art website, my general photography website. And here is where I post, well, I'll have the recordings. I could post it to the recording to the web. So I'm going to bring this up. So I have a still life photographer, Michael Pucciarelli, which is me. I have, a section on equipment and still life and light painting. I have a light painting webinar in Photoshop. I have a black plexiglass table. I have, how I use Adobe software in still life photography, and then I have the white plexiglass webinar. Do you have any questions? Sorry I came in late. That's okay, but I'm recording this. You can unmute if you want to speak. I'm going to check the chat. What's in the chat? Well, you can always email me at this email if you have a question, or you could, oh, I got to check the chat. Okay, I'm glad you liked it. So you can always connect with me on Instagram, Michael Pucciarelli. So I'm going to end the recording. And I'll post the recording of this later.